Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LTH product briefing. I'm here today with my friend, fellow Australian CEO of Neota Julian Uebergang. Julian, welcome and thank you for being on the program.
Lovely to be here, Nikki. Thank you for having me.
So Julian, Neota has been around for a while. It really was sort of the original expert systems technology in the legal space, really well known as a product, but it's evolved substantially over time. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, good question, Nikki. So thank you for that. So as you said, our roots are sort of in the expert system space. So, essentially that was around guided digital interviews with reasoning embedded within it, and then a response delivered to the user based on the questions that had been answered and the reasoning that had been implemented. More recently, we've added workflow to our platform, which enables interactions to span multiple teams, multiple parties, and also multiple time periods. And we've also incorporated a document automation capability. So we have a word add-in that enables legal precedents to be marked up, imported into the platform, and then you can consume those within a workflow or within an expert system and deliver drafts of those documents through a digital interaction. So it's evolved quite substantially. The other thing that we've added is a data management layer. So all of our tools are able to have their data stored through, optionally stored into a database, and that's really helpful for, reporting, analytics, and data tracking purposes.
And in fact, there is, if I can mention it, a new product on the horizon. Is that right?
One of the things that we've created is a new product called Architect, which we'll be releasing later this year. And essentially that is a new way to create tasks within a workflow. And those tasks, you're able to ask questions, you're able to configure logic. So you're able to do some of the things you could do in our earlier products. But the other thing that you can do is create a really elegant runtime experience. So we've really separated the end user experience creation element from the logic construction element. So really a lot of flexibility around how you create that end user experience, right down to the pixel level. So a lot of our clients are using designers, are using branding agencies, are using really sophisticated ways of creating that end user experience, and they want that, as I said, delivered at that perfect level. So we've got a tool that helps you do that.
It sounds exciting. Well, we look forward to that. And in the meantime, Julian, you are going to provide us with a bit of a product demo. What are you going to show us today?
Yeah, so I'll just share my screen. I'm gonna sort of start with workflow, and I'm going to walk through a bit of a use case demo and show you some of the tools and the capability, including Architect, that I just referred to. So feel free to ask any questions as we go, but I'll launch into it. So essentially, what you're seeing on the screen is our workflow product. So this is our business process automation tool, which enables users to create their workflows in a visual environment using the BPMN, or the Business Process Model and Notation Standard. And essentially all that means is that the iconography and the terminology that you see on the screen comes from a standard that's adopted across workflow products. So if you've used workflow products before, this will be quite familiar to you. So yeah, we've adopted that standard within the platform. We released this a few years ago, so this isn't particularly new, but for some of you, it may be the first time you're seeing it. And what I'm going to walk through here is just a use case. And this is the Corporate Transparency Act, or the CTA, which took effect on January 1st, 2024. And it requires so it's US legislation, it requires certain companies to submit beneficial ownership information reports, or BOI reports, to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. And I guess referring to a use case or a topical use case allows us to put some context, or provide some context to the platform in terms of features and functionalities, but the capabilities and concepts that I'll talk about here can be applied to any workflow or any business process. The advantages of automating these sorts of processes through a tool like Neota include, risk reduction through standardization of data entry, time and cost efficiency spent when you're digitizing manual processes, real-time updating and monitoring, and greater transparency over the status of compliance, in this case through the CTA tool. And just one final point before I sort of walk through the demo. So this is a solution. There are many ways to implement a CTA compliance application. What we're seeing here is through the perspective of a law firm. So this is a law firm essentially assisting their clients determine where they might sit on that compliance spectrum. So that's what we'll walk through here. Okay, so if you think about this workflow here as an orchestration layer, essentially what we're seeing here is we've got the high level workflow, and then within the workflow we've got these boxes or tasks, and essentially they're discrete pieces of logic that can be embedded within an application, and the workflow is essentially organizing the sequence of navigating from one to the other. So when you're looking at this workflow, you can see some pools here. The top one here represents the law firm with various personas within the law firm in terms of partner, paralegal, etc., and the client is down the bottom. And essentially what we're going to do now is we're going to just start running the first. So I'm just going to run this application, and we're running the start of the workflow. So this is the first task in the workflow. And this is just asking, so this is the partner, and I'm just answering a question which says, yes, I'm responsible for the client. And I'm just going to give some information about the client that I'm going to send this questionnaire. So I'm just going to put in some details, and then I'm going to select the method of notifying the client, and I'm going to select email, and then that will navigate and send that email directly to the client. And there is a dashboard here. There is a dashboard configured which allows me to see all of the CTA initiations that have been set up. But for the purposes of this demo, I'll just skip through back to the workflow.
And so Julian, that front end interface is fully able to be branded, is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll show you how to do that as we go through the demo, but you can configure that according to your branding guidelines in a really granular way, which is one of the key differentiators of the Neota platform. So absolutely. So if we go back to the workflow, as I said before, the workflow is an orchestration layer. And what we did here, just to sort of take you back from the end user view back into the workflow. So we've basically started at the start. We've essentially gone through to the first application, and then we've asked the questions that are configured within that first application. And then that has ended. So essentially what happens within the workflow is that you basically traverse down the workflow depending on the answers to the questions that have been provided. So in this case, we said, yes, we were responsible for the client. So we've traversed down this path. We said we wanted to initiate the invitation through an email. So we've traversed down this path, and then we've sent the email to the client. So depending on the answers to the questions, you can traverse down, any number of these paths depending on the information that's been provided as part of the interaction. There's a whole bunch of things I could talk about in terms of workflow. There's a whole lot of capability that is really useful, around how you can branch logic and how you can sort of run things in parallel, and you can really do some quite sophisticated things. But in the interest of sort of brevity and managing time, the one thing that I wanted to just highlight here is the types of tasks that we can create. If you look at these two examples here on the screen, and hopefully my cursor's coming through and you can see where I'm highlighting, but there are two types of tasks here in this workflow. One is the one on the right here is one where there is an interface. So the first task that we went through before showed you an interface where the user is answering questions and going through a series of screens. The one on the left, which is sort of denoted by this icon here, is essentially what we call a service task. And service tasks are really powerful. Essentially, what service tasks do is applications that run without an interface, and they're really useful for things like integrating with third-party products and services. And one of the things that we've done a lot of recently with our clients is we've been able to leverage AI assistance, and in particular Azure AI assistance, which is, I think our clients tend to prefer the security layers that Microsoft have applied over the Azure OpenAI implementation. And what you can do is essentially, as part of a workflow, if there is a need or an element of a use case that requires or could benefit from generative AI, you can use that assistant to call out through a web service call, and you can do things like provide documents and get risk ratings back, or you could get key data points back from particular documents. So you can incorporate those into your workflow in a way that enhances the workflow and really adds value to the workflow. So that's something that we've spent a lot of time doing with our clients, and I just sort of wanted to mention that.
Very cool. So it effectively, you can have an end-to-end workflow that involves different stages, some of which are catered for by a front-end questionnaire, user-facing questionnaire, and others that are service tasks that operate in the background, including pinging websites, leveraging AI assistance, etc., and also triggering emails to people.
Indeed, and also batch processes. So if you wanted to generate multiple transactions, if you wanted to generate multiple documents in the background, service tasks are really good to do that sort of thing as well. So really powerful in terms of what you can do at the workflow level. So now we're just going to jump ahead, and what I want to now do is show you the architect tool, which I talked about. So we're going to sort of step in and create a task. And, within that task, you can do things like create questions, you can configure logic, you can produce outputs. There's really a bunch of really useful things that you can do at that level. So we'll just jump into architect now, and I'm just going to sort of show you that tool. So this is essentially the architect interface.
So this
And
is
this is the
sneak
product.
peek, everyone, of something that is yet to launch, right?
Absolutely. It is in beta, but we'll be formally launching it later in the year. And I'll just sort of walk around the screen a little bit. There is a guided tutorial, so you can navigate, you can learn the various elements of the product. You can navigate around the interface. You can see the toolbox here, and it sort of expands and sort of shows you where the tools are, and has some hover overs that show you how they work and those sorts of things. There is a table of contents effectively on the left-hand side there, which is really useful for keeping things organized, and that can be really helpful for maintenance purposes ongoing. We know that it can be difficult to pick up work products over time and make changes, but the way this is organized really allows you to do that quite effectively. So what we're going to do here is just going to jump in and configure a question. Okay, so this is essentially a question to a user as part of the tasks. So back in the workflow that we showed you before, this is essentially how you can configure those questions. And this is the question that we asked before in terms of, am I responsible for the client, yes or no? And I'm just going to change the answers here to illustrate how simple it is to do through the interface. And now what we might do is just ask another question. So we'll add another question to the task so that we can add another data point. And I'm just going to call this question already spoken to customer. And I'm going to make this a list question so that the user can select from a number of different options rather than another data type, which could allow you to enter free text or various other things. And we're just going to configure the question here that we ask the user, have you already spoken to the client about CTA compliance? And we're just going to populate some values for the user to select from here. So we'll say yes, but not about this specific tool. Yes, and they're expecting the email, and no, just for the purposes of the demo. So now what we might do is drop that onto our form. So this is the form that we saw before, and what we're going to do now is just show you how you can drop that question onto the form into the right place. So it's just drag and drop onto the form. There are two ways that you can incorporate the question. You can incorporate the question as a question, or you can drop the value if the user has already answered that question and you wanted to drop that in onto a form downstream in the workflow. You could do that as well. And I'm just going to amend the title here just for the purposes of illustration and showing you how easy it is to configure. And then what I might do is we might create some logic here that shows you how you can sort of utilize the data downstream. So we're just going to create another question here. Attachment should be added. And we've just made that a yes, no question. So it's a binary question. And then what we're going to do now is create a rule, which will essentially use the two variables that we've just created to deliver some logic. So firstly, we'll just drop in the first question, have we already spoken to the client? On the left-hand side, so if have we already spoken to the client, then the attachment should be added. And you can see that there's some warnings here which highlight to me that, I've got some semantic errors with the logic that I'm using. I haven't yet populated the values. So it's just giving me that feedback so that I can troubleshoot as I go, which is obviously really important as you're building. Let's just say I've already spoken to the client, no, then the attachment should be added, yes. So we've essentially just created another data point there, which we can use to populate that document in the right circumstances. So running the tool, you can see where our question has been added onto the form, and you can see where our title has been amended. So that just shows you what that looks like from an end user perspective.
That's great. It looks so easy to use, Julian.
Yeah, we've really worked hard on that element as well. So this is just the runtime experience, just the final piece of the demo, just showing you how you can configure and create that end user experience. And if you think about most organizations, as I said earlier, we work with large organizations. Typically, they usually have brand guidelines or style guidelines or brand books that need to be adhered to. Normally, they consist of color palettes that sort of make up your brand. I'm just going to change the color to something probably fairly unattractive just for the purposes of this in terms of the bright orange. But you can see, and essentially what you're doing here is you're configuring your theme in one place and utilizing that across all of the digital tools that you could create. There's the color elements, there's the font element as well, which you can configure in a very similar way to the way that you would in Microsoft Word. And you can add as many elements to your font library as you wish. And then the third element is all of the components that you use on a form that you drop onto a form. So, headers, footers, I'll just change the color of the footer here again change it to my favorite color orange, just for the purposes of showing you what it looks like. There you go, it looks beautiful. But really, all of this is configured in one place. So when you're doing rebrands and those sorts of things, you're really changing once and applying many times, which is a real benefit for customers who build work product over time. And here,
I wonder if it removes the need for having, a separate, I suppose, group that does this design, because you're effectively bringing that low code to the design elements as well.
Exactly. Or you can even allow your designers to implement this component as well and have full control over this part of the digital construction, and the knowledge management team or the experts might just configure the logic. But you can just had a blue background on the selected state of that text box there, just for the purposes of illustration. And sort of finally, responsiveness out of the box, so you don't have to do anything different in terms of managing for various device usage. So you can see that it scales automatically, which is obviously really important. So these are a lot of the things that we've learned over the years that our users really value. And what you can see here is how you can apply a theme across the application that we've just created that looks totally different. So you can really create some beautiful end user experiences that are in line with your corporate style guides. And here's another one just for the purposes of illustration. So we haven't changed the questions or the logic there. All we've done is apply a different skin effectively to the application. And you can see it's a totally different experience. So that is essentially the Architect tool, which we're looking forward to releasing later in the year.
Fantastic, Julian. Well, thank you so much for showing us. And if people want to get in touch, we'll put a URL down at the bottom. You can reach out to Julian and his team. Stay tuned, everyone, for the release of Architect. I know I will be looking forward to that. Julian, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
No, much appreciated, Nikki. Thanks for having me.
And thanks, everyone, for joining the LTH product briefing. See you next time.